Truth fears no questions.
Welcome to the Middle East Stream. I'm Marwan. Lebanese parliamentarians voted on Wednesday in the highly anticipated first round of presidential elections, with the majority of votes split between Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja and blank ballots in protest of his candidacy. The first count of the ballots gave 52 blank votes, 48 votes for Jaja and 16 for Henry Hello. 7 votes for nominating people who were allegedly killed by Jaja were declared void. No candidate managed to obtain 86 voices or votes as a legal minimum necessary to be elected in this session. Now, a second vote is expected to take place on April 30. In the next session, a candidate will only need to secure 50% of votes, meaning 65, to win the presidency. To further elaborate whether a president will be elected soon or not, with us tonight in the studio is Dr. Ziad Al-Hafez, Secretary General of the Arab National Forum. Welcome with us, Dr. Hafez.
Thank you.
And also via link with us is Mr. Marwan Maalouf, co-founder of Ajil Joumhouriya Group. Welcome with us, Mr. Maalouf.
Welcome.
Now let us begin by watching this following report.
Lebanon's parliament has failed to elect a new president in what is set to be a prolonged saga closely linked to Syria's upcoming elections in June. The parliamentary session began at noon on Wednesday. No candidate succeeded in getting the minimum of 86 votes, or two-third majority, needed to win the presidency. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri warned on Friday that political conditions were not mature enough for the election of a president, according to Lebanon's Al Safir newspaper. 4 members out of the 128-member parliament did not attend the voting session, and 7 votes were considered void. The 8 March coalition's member of parliament submitted 82 blank ballots. Samir Jaja, leader of the Lebanese Forces Party, backed by the 14 March coalition, had 48 votes, while ex-president Amin Jmail secured only 1 vote, and member of parliament Henry Hello won 16 votes. Hello, whose father Pierre Hello has occupied several ministerial posts, is supported by a limited bloc of independents and centrists, including Druze leader Walid Jumblat, who announced his stance a day ahead of the parliamentary voting. A legal minimum of 2/3 of the votes is needed for a candidate to become president. If not available, only a 50+1 majority will be needed during the second voted round. A president must be elected in the period between March 25th and May 15th. The next session to elect a president will be held on April 30. The Lebanese power-sharing system requires a Maronite Christian as president, a Sunni Muslim as a prime minister, along with a Shia Muslim for a parliament speaker. This formula did not evolve out of the blue. Rather, it dates back to a 1943 agreement. Such political ethnic conditions were reasserted during the 1989 Taif Agreement, which put an end to the 15-year civil war. The peace deal also empowered the premier's post at the presidency's account.
So, Dr. Hafez, does the parliament's failure to elect a president shows that no head of state will be appointed without a regional rapprochement will be elected?
That slip of tongue is quite Freudian.
Well, will be elected, let's say, without I put appointed because I wanted to say a rapprochement between regional powers, which are namely Iran and Saudi Arabia, because we've been used in the Lebanese arena that no head of state or prime minister can be elected or appointed or whatever you want to name it without a consensus from the regional powers.
Well, that's the result of what you call the weight of history. Let's see, if you go back only to Independence Day, since 1943, all presidents have been elected within the framework of a regional and/or international consensus or agreement. Because Lebanon, by definition, is a buffer state. And a buffer state in political science is a state who is created to play a certain role. It may not have the ingredients, so to speak, for a natural evolution and to statehood, but it is there because powers that be have decided that it should be a state. Now, also the Lebanese have demonstrated over the last 60 or 70 years, a particular inability to manage themselves. They are quite content to have someone do the bidding for them, tell them not to, like a school teacher to his class, do this and don't do that. And that is the only way to settle scores among warring and disputing factions. That's a very sad state, but that's a fact of life. Now, in this particular instance, Lebanon is an arena of the various regional conflicts. It has been so in the past, and it is still now, notwithstanding, for instance, the recent events in Syria, which is as much a Lebanese issue as much as it is a Syrian issue. Lebanon is divided vertically along with or against what's happening in Syria, or against either part of the warring factions in Syria. Now, having said that, it seems today that there is some form of regional international consensus to stabilize somewhat the game in Lebanon and not to have it to the overspill of the violence that is taking place in Syria. And therefore, this is how we managed to designate a prime minister. That's how we managed to form a government. That's also how we managed to agree on the ministerial statement. Now, the presidency is not outside that field of game, and therefore you have to expect that the kind of agreement that has to take place among the various regional actors is going to be manifested itself in the choice of the future president of Lebanon. He has to be mirroring the state of affairs in the region. Do we like it as Lebanese? Definitely not. But I think until you are able to create a new political dynamic within the country,
this is the only viable option.
It is a fact of life. I don't say it is a viable option. It is, as of today, it's a fact of life. And it will be up to the Lebanese to be able to overcome all these barriers.
Well, Mr. Maalouf, yesterday's failure was actually not a surprise for neither Lebanese or Lebanese politicians for that matter. And it also exposed the deep rifts amongst the country's political elites. Now, does this mean that there is a near certainty that provocative candidates from either side of the political divisions will not be elected to the presidential position?
I don't think so. It could be a sign that only consensual candidate could win the election, but I think that a number of strong candidates still hope to be elected in the parliament, but I don't think this is the issue today. Neither the Lebanese are expecting any kind of strong leader that could win the election and could lead the country. I think, as your guest mentioned, I wouldn't blame the Lebanese people. I would blame the establishment, the same political class that has been governing Lebanon almost since the independence, that made this country a play. Yesterday's meeting was the kind of a play with 124 actors playing a game that they learned it really well before going to the parliament to meet for the first time with this number. I think what is shocking is really how far those parliamentarians went to disrespect the Lebanese people. I think Lebanon is the only country where you don't know the candidates until the votes are being casted. Until yesterday, we couldn't really know who are the candidates. And it's really, at least let's let them play the game till the end and have those candidates come in front of those parliamentarians and suggest their plan for leading the country. Unfortunately, yesterday was again kind of a game of big political poles that are really governing and devising the country, although they are agreeing between each other on every single other decision, like corruption and such a number of issues that they come to agree on.
But they never managed to actually agree upon.
they agree on all the other levels. They agree on not voting economical reforms. They agree on not raising the salaries of professors. They agree on selling the country to foreign countries. But they keep on showing that they are in disagreement on a political level. When you have a Minister of Interior in Lebanon that invites an outsider to a meeting of high command of his army, that shows that even a minister from the 14th of March do not really respect the sovereignty of his country. So there where I show that everyone is in agreement on coming against the Republic and coming against the sovereignty of this country, and laughing and making the Lebanese people a joke. Unfortunately, and especially also with the candidates that has been,
mentioning the candidates there, Mr. Maalouf, exactly. Mentioning candidates, let's start with you, Dr. Hafez. The March 14th candidate, Mr. Samir Jaja, earned only 48 votes out of the total 124, ahead of Mr. Walid Jumblat's candidate, Henri Hello, who earned 16 votes. Now, why did Mr. Jumblat decide to cast the name of Mr. Hello instead of voting for Jaja?
No, he has said previously he will not be voting for Jaja. He said that the new president should be a person who
centrist.
A centrist as in modern parlance, but where he will be able to talk to all factions in Lebanon, and there will be no veto against him by any faction.
But Mr. Jaja clearly did put out his political agenda and said that he will be a centrist for all the Lebanese. He had, 20 days before actually the date of yesterday, he had put out his program to to each of his fellow members of political parties in Lebanon. He was very clear with his program. So
that's political theater. I mean, a president in the present constitution cannot have an agenda. He has no powers to implement. He can say whatever he wants, and it is totally irrelevant to the power that be. I mean, he cannot even make a statement without having the permission of the Council of Ministers, if you want to be very strict and constitutionalist. So developing a political program is irrelevant. So that's not the point. The point is, it is theater, it's political theater. Not to say that the substance of his program is irrelevant, no, but the program per se is irrelevant because it cannot be implemented by one person, by a president. He does not have the political clout to do it. He does not have the constitutional powers to implement.
Exactly, that's because the constitution will not grant him any more
so
power.
why do you submit a program which you know very well you cannot achieve anything out of it? Even the sitting president, General Suleiman, when he was elected president, and he made a wonderful speech at the ceremony of the oath ceremony when he was sworn in, but he could not achieve anything. It's not up to him. So I really sometimes wonder why everybody is making such a fuss about the president when he is almost, I wouldn't say just a ceremonial figure, but a figure that does not really carry any clout politically.
Well, since Mr. Maalouf, since we are talking about the failure of certain candidates and bringing up their program or actually having a program in the first place, Jaja's failure yesterday to secure the nomination was actually widely expected by all the political blocs in Lebanon, given his dark, controversial past and his continuous criticism as well of Hezbollah's involvement in Syria now. However, Jaja is not the only figure in that place, actually, in the parliament that was there in the parliament yesterday with the dark past. Now, they all do, even March 18th's candidate, Mr. Aoun, which we will be talking about later, also have a dark past. So why all the fuss about Mr. Jaja's candidacy?
No, I agree with you, but just to go back, just to comment on one of the comments that were... I think the president could have a role and could have authorities. By the constitution, he has one essential role, which is to protect the constitution. And we have seen lately how many times the constitution has not been respected, not to say about the extension of the parliament with no election. So I think it's really not very wise to promote the idea that our president is not strong with the constitution. Of course, he doesn't have all the powers, But the problem is not having a strong candidate and a strong leader is the fact that is making this position a marionette between the political parties. Our president could have an authority. Our president have the power with his signature to stop a number of laws and also push for a number of regulation in the country and to protect the constitution and the sovereignty, and he's the head of the Lebanese forces and the
But in
Lebanese
reality,
army.
he doesn't have the full choice
in
to do
reality,
that.
we have been getting weak president in power based into a consensus. That is the problem. Not the problem. Like I'm not saying that he has the full power. Of course, we know our division of power since Ta'if. But what I'm saying, because some journalists went to the extreme and saying we shouldn't even have election, and why Lebanese are interested with this election. No, Lebanese are interested with this election because it's the Lebanese president that is being elected, and we should be aiming to have a strong leader. Going back to your question, I think a lot of the Lebanese people, and if you follow yesterday the social media and part of the media, and even the 7 votes that were voided with the names of the alleged
victims of
Ja'ja.
Victims.
I wish that other members of parliament would have casted the 17,000 disappeared during the civil war, or the 100,000 killed during the civil war that were the result of the crimes of Nabi Birri, the crimes of Walid Jumblat, the crimes of a huge majority of the Lebanese establishment in the parliament. Again, of course, a lot of Lebanese refuse the candidacy of Samir Ja'ja. All this political class should be convicted, and we should have the truth about what happened in the Lebanese war. I would have wished yesterday that the families of the victims of the Lebanese civil war would protest against the parliament and call for the fact that the amnesty law that was passed after the civil war is in fact our main issue in Lebanon, that have allowed those criminals and those warlords to stay in power. So I think it's a general question. Unfortunately, 8th of March played it against Ja'ja, like if they were, in French we say Saint Nitouche, if they were like angels who'd never had any blood on their hands.
Exactly, Mr. Maalouf, we will talk deeper into this issue with you and Dr. Hafez, but we have to take our first break for tonight. Please stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse,
beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
We are back with the Middle East stream with Dr. Ziad Hafez, Secretary General of the Arab National Forum, and Mr. Marwan Maalouf, one of the co-founders of Ajil al-Joumhouriya group. Now, the Lebanese presidential elections have heightened the rivalry between the March 8th and March 14th coalitions, as March 8th strongly opposed the candidacy of March 14 backed Ja'ja, who spent 11 years in prison for crimes committed during the civil war. With no strong contender for the post, leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, Michel Aoun, has been considered as a potential consensus candidate for the second round. Presidents in Lebanon has always been chosen through a parliamentary and cabinet vote as opposed to a general election. However, will a consensus be reached amongst rival camps to elect a president in time and without regional approval? More details in the following report.
The Lebanese parliament convened on Wednesday, April 23rd, to elect a president. The voting was carried out correctly, and as expected, there wasn't a winner. The results of this session surprised no one. As soon as the first round of voting ended, March 8 Member of Parliament left the hall in an attempt to prevent a quorum for a second round of voting. Yet the curtain came down on the theater, and the prospect of a vacuum seems likely again. The Ta'if Accord did not change, but rather sanctified the habit of the main political blocs agreeing upon the next president before the voting session. The parliamentary vote is just a formality since an understanding has already reached by the political blocs that speak for their sects. That's in form, and in reality an agreement, if occurred, would be regional first and foremost, or at least a settlement among the regional actors on the Lebanese arena. This applies not only to presidents but also to the formation of governments. So, for example, the government of Prime Minister Tamam Salam, which was formed nearly a month ago, was the result of a minimal settlement between Iran and Saudi Arabia through several mediators, led by France and the United States. Today's question is whether the agreement that produced the government is still there, and if so, whether it applies to the presidency, or whether electing a president requires an understanding of another caliber. Such an agreement requires a new debate and rounds of negotiation, some kept a secret and others declared. At this point in time, nothing on the horizon indicates a consensus of the next president. Of course, the president makers, meaning the regional powers of concern, claim to support the constitutional institutions, especially the presidency, and say they stand at the same distance from all candidates. Yet the reality of things is that the settlement has either not ripened or it did happen but requires time to be revealed.
Dr. Hafez, it is plain obvious that the coming sessions, if held, would pave the way for a consensus candidate and eliminate the stronger personalities that may be seen as provocative to either side of the political division in Lebanon. Now, in your opinion, who is the strongest consensus candidate? I mean, could it be again an army general?
He is a possibility, but I'm not sure that it is in the cards as of today still. I mean, you never know what may happen between now and next week. As Mr. Maalouf has pointed out, the Lebanese would know at the last minute who is the candidate, probably after the vote has been cast. Having said that, General Qawaji is a candidate, and how you label him as consensus is a matter of opinion at the end of the day, not Qawaji per se, but any candidate who is going to be labeled as a consensus candidate is a matter of opinion and wishful thinking. But
so you mean a provocative leader or a provocative candidate might become a consensus one if a deal is stricken?
Yes.
Wow.
That's exactly the candidacy of Michel Aoun. He is viewed by many Lebanese as a provocative candidate and abrasive personality. And at the same time, he is the only one who may, quote-unquote, deliver Hezbollah to come into the mainstream of Lebanese politics and not be as divisive as it has been so far. This is the theory. Whether it's true or not is a matter of opinion. But it is very possible that the powers that be may decide that it is in their best interest to have a candidate like General Aoun to be a consensus president. Whether he will be or not is a different matter. But therefore, that's why I said the definition of a consensual presidency is really an arbitrary one and subject to all sorts of standards that may change with the person and with time.
Well, Mr. Maalouf, everybody is voicing the need for a consensus candidate, yet incumbent President Michel Sleiman was at the beginning a consensus candidate, and when in office he tended to take sides in internal and regional political differences. So was the case of his case was very similar to the case of former President Emil Lahoud as well. Now, what makes this time any different from the others?
Oh, first, President Slimane became a bit non-consensual the last year, not even. So again, they tend to be very consensual till half of their mandate. And then I think President Slimane, when he felt that he will not be re-elected, then he decided really to say his own political views out loud. I think, there's two things we haven't discussed yet, and I think it's more important than going into the idea of which consensual candidate is. I think the first major important thing to point out is that yesterday was approved that the parliamentarian found a way to attend the session without electing a president, which is a dangerous thing, in order to show to the people that they are trying to elect a president without agreeing on someone. So they could play the same game over and over till the end without really electing a president, which is a very dangerous outcome. I think all Lebanese people, despite the fact the president will be elected, we are all calling to respect the constitution and to have a president elected.
So you mean a president will not be elected unless a deal is stricken, or let's say at least unless serious presidential elections are
I'm saying our political establishment might go to having a no president, and in order to postpone the choice of the president until other issues are solved. But I'm saying that they found the way to show to the people that they are trying, so they would continue to go to and ensuring the quorum, because a lot of debate was before the session if the quorum will be respected and if all the parliamentarians will go to the session, and they did, but they came out with the idea of casting blanket votes and not really agreeing on someone. So there is a possibility that this scenario will be made for the second round of election, and no one will really gather the 65 votes, and we could reach the deadline of May 25 without having a president, and then we'll be in a void situation where, and I think if that will happen, I think the Lebanese people will be really clear to say, you need to go back to the people and you need to hold an early parliamentarian election in order to elect, because anyway this elected parliament is not legitimate, but we couldn't change it. But in case we reach a point where there is a void and they couldn't elect the president, this parliament should be dismantled, and we should have an early election to elect a new parliament that indirectly will elect a strong candidate. We are fed up of having weak candidates. I think Lebanese people we are mature enough to have a leader that could come from or 8 or 14 and who could lead.
Well, Dr. Hafez, do you agree with what Mr. Maalouf is saying? I mean, could it be that the parliamentary elections is much more important right now from a presidential one?
Yes, because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, the president himself, no matter how you want to view him, has rather limited powers and cannot really change the course of things. But Parliament is the real arena where things are taking place, also with the government, and the government is coming from the Parliament, is not coming from outside the Parliament.
But that puts out a question of whether or not the Constitution will be amended for a certain
Well, definitely if you don't have a president,
election
it
law,
means that you have a
law.
basic political stalemate in Lebanon, and